It's time for my virtual Jericho with John Mayer.
Hello and good afternoon. After the huge excitement of last week with TV stars live from Channel 4 News Studio and the book fair on Sunday, which 250 people came to. Thank you to all of you that came to that. That was a very grand afternoon. We're going to have an art fair on the 24th of July. Please come to that. Now we're going to get local this week again. Mark Davies has done 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 My Jerichos in his time about local history. As you know, he is the doyen of the historians of Jericho and indeed of Osney, where he's now moved. Mark's going to talk this afternoon about Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland and maybe what Alice in Wonderland found in Jericho. Mark, over to you.
Right, yes, thank you very much. I think Lewis Carroll and Alice, they are the kind of gifts that keep on giving in many ways, because there's so much to be said about both individuals, but Carroll in particular. And the reason that we decided that this is an appropriate moment for me to give a talk about Looking Glass was because of its 150th anniversary. So with that opening image, you've got the full title of Carroll's sequel to Wonderland was Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. So this talk is a kind of a little glimpse of what Alice found in Jericho. More correctly, it's what Carroll himself found there, because we will touch on the actual Alice coming to Jericho a few times, but it's more about the author himself. And indeed, I should point out, just to avoid any complaints, I won't be talking a lot about Looking Glass, because actually the Jericho associations come earlier than the publication of the sequel. Next. And it's the building there with the chimney smoking on the right-hand side, which is the focus for all of the Jericho associations, really, with this world-famous story. I've not come across any references by Lewis Carroll or Alice about going to the canal or going anywhere into the depths of the suburb, which had a pretty poor reputation in Victorian times, let's face it. Also, an area where disease was prevalent from time to time. It's not the sort of place where certainly a respectable young lady would tend to go very often in those days, although I suspect Carroll certainly did, as we'll come to towards the end of my talk. And that is the Oxford University Press. I have to keep reminding myself that, of course, this talk may get an international audience. I feel like I am living close to Jericho, and I'm talking about Jericho, and there will be a lot of Jericho people, no doubt, listening. But of course, people who don't know the location, just to underline what we're looking at there on the right-hand side of that image from about 1850 is the Oxford University Press, or the Clarendon Press, as it was more correctly known at that time. Next. And again, this is just really to give you, if you're not familiar with the location, your bearings. There's the image of the press from the other side, from the landward side, if you like, from the looking from the east. And it is, when you look at the map there, it's the dark square shape towards the top right-hand corner. That is the quadrangle of the University Press. So that's the location. That's the and you can just see that the housing of Jericho is just beginning to cluster around the press, which was the catalyst for the houses that we see today, which then spread slowly westwards and northwestwards across the water meadows that were there previously. So that's, again, well, you can see an image from 1850, and it's the 1850s, which is when Lewis Carroll, Charles Dodgson first comes to Jericho to Oxford as a Christ Church undergraduate. Next. So that's hopefully given you a sort of geographical context. Now let me just give you a chronological one. Dodgson, born 1832 in Cheshire, as I say, came here as an undergraduate at Christ Church in the 1850s. The images I've just shown you are sort of pretty much bang on for that sort of period. Alice herself was not born in Oxford, but lived most of her younger years actually in Christchurch as well. The boat trips are my particular angle normally when I'm talking about this topic and the River Thames, because it was hugely important in the creation of the stories. And we move then to Looking Glass, but as I say, most of the Jericho associations within the story come a bit earlier than that. Okay, next. And here's in that diary reference there, 6th of March 1857. That's Lewis Carroll's first reference to meeting Thomas Combe. So now he is key to almost everything that I'm going to tell you about from here on. He was the superintendent of the printing press on the, well, yes, essentially, he had control of all sorts of materials that would be printed. The press was divided into two, Bibles and academic normally, and it was because of Charles Dodgson's name. I'll call him by his real name for the moment because he hasn't started writing the books yet. So Charles Dodgson had reason to get to know Combe because of the mathematical papers that he was printing rather earlier. So that's why he's interested in that reference there. And here's the first of my little commercial breaks. I am a member of the Lewis Carroll Society, and I do have here in Oxford the Lewis Carroll Society bookstock. And these diaries of his are supremely interesting, though I say it myself, not even if you're not interested in the way that the stories of Alice were created. He met so many people of different kinds. I'm going to introduce you to some of them shortly. And so he records in great detail sometimes a lot of these meetings with different individuals, and where the detail is left out, then these diaries, which are published by the Society, have absolutely brilliant contextual notes added by the world famous, or the world expert essentially in all things Carroll. So anybody interested, you can find out more about these diaries at the Lewis Carroll Society website there. But I have them available at a very cheap rate for anybody in Oxford. Next. Sorry about that. Let's move on to the sort of the proper history. And here is the individual, the Thomas Combe, the printer at the University Press, who is key really to all of the references that one can make towards, in respect of Lewis Carroll, Alice and Jericho. He is the glue that attracts that kind of attention. And it's mainly because of his being a patron of the arts, and that painting of him there was done by one of the original pre-Raphaelite artists, John Everett Millais, and the way that the artists Combe and Carroll all kind of intermingle in an interesting way are really the basis of what I'm going to outline in the next few minutes. Next. And it is the pictures, of course, which, I say of course, it is the pictures which give Lewis Carroll the rationale to bring Alice and others connected with her to the press at Jericho to marvel at them, really. He was a collector of art, but particularly the pre-Raphaelite works. And so here's another two entries from Carroll's diaries. Going to the University Press, visited the pictures. So that was with Alice herself, Alice Liddell, the daughter of the Dean of Christchurch, the young girl who inspired the book. And on this occasion, Carroll had two of his sisters visiting. He was one of 11 children, and his aunt also came. And what's interesting about that particular moment in time, I'll just digress slightly here, is that the following day, 2 days earlier, that's right, they had all gone on a long boat trip down to Newnham, which is about 6 miles away by river. They got drenched in a downpour, and it's that real event, that real river trip, which then Lewis Carroll sort of contrives a few years later. almost at this time, he's already starting to think about the book. A month later, he starts to think that he might write a book about Alice. So this event is very much at the foremost of his mind, and he sort of molds it into becoming what is known as the episode of the Pool of Tears in the published book. So then the next year, February, and 1863 is huge. There's so many interesting references in the diary to various people that he meets, inspiring him to mould this sort of germ of an idea of a book that he's already got in his head over the year of 1863. You'll see quite a few dates are referenced as we go along. So again, different group of people. It's Alice, her sisters, the governess, that's Miss Prickett. She's an Oxford lady. And the reason that I've got the image of from Looking Glass there on the bottom of the Red Queen is because Mary Prickett is pretty much a shoo-in for having inspired at least some of the characteristics of the Red Queen, which a character who Carroll called the concentrated essence of all governesses. And then also of interest, I think, with that February 1863 entry is that after going to visit the Coombs and look at the pictures at the press, they then went on to the museum. Now that is the relatively new Museum of Natural History, the University Museum, and there within the museum it possesses the best preserved organic remains of the dodo. So the dodo is itself, that's the image that you see in the top there, with the Pool of Tears scenario at the end of it. So Dodo, Dodgson, he had this speech hesitation, this slight stutter perhaps, so he's having a little joke at himself. And there's a double meaning there, because the girls would certainly have gone and seen or been aware of these dodo remnants at the museum, and Carroll indeed even went there with them on that day. Next. And which pictures might they have gone to see on those two occasions in 1863? Well, I think this would have been one of them, because this was really early on in Thomas Coombs' association with the Pre-Raphaelites. It is said to, well, it was certainly worked on because within the press at Jericho, once Thomas Combe had become familiar with Millais, who did the sketch there of Charles Alston Collins, his friend, once he got to know them, he invited them to their premises within the press, and they set up their studio there, and they completed a number of paintings. And this is one of those paintings which Combe subsequently purchased. In so doing, he sustained the movement. Really, it wasn't everybody's cup of tea at the time. They struggled a little bit, and they needed people like Combe to put their hands in their pockets to subsidise the work they were doing. And so this is one of the pictures that they would have seen on that occasion. Next. This is just not a picture they would have seen on the trip, I think, but on the visit, but it just gives you an impression of how accommodating Thomas Combe was to these Pre-Raphaelites, people who, as you'll see in a moment, to get back to the sort of Alice theme that Carroll knew quite well himself too. So that is Millais sitting on the floor there. Thomas Combe is reading to all of them. Everybody else gathered there, including Martha, and it's something that Millais himself referenced, how he loved to, while he was in Jericho, to when he was doing his painting, to have Thomas Combe read to him at the same time that he was doing his artwork. And Aunt Pat, she was known as Aunt Pat. They had no children, the Combes, but Thomas Combe was known as Pat sometimes, which was short for patriarch, because he was the ruler of the roost, if you like, at the University Press, and so she became known affectionately as Aunt Pat. Next. The picture on the right is also one that the girls, Alice Liddell and her sisters and so on, would have been on display at the Combes home. And this was painted by another of the Pre-Raphaelites, Holman Hunt. they wouldn't probably, well, they certainly wouldn't have seen the other one. It's a bit of a mystery, actually. The one of Martha was never presented to her, even though it was done at more or less the same time. In the end, Holman Hunt never ever produced it, never gave it to her. Whether he thought it wasn't up to scratch, whether she objected, don't know at all. He did present it to the Ashmolean, but it was he who presented it to them, not Martha herself. She seems never actually to have ever seen it, or certainly it was never in her possession. But bringing Holman Hunt into the story next, then enables me to sort of underline what a brilliant photographer Carroll was. I don't think any of the photographs of his that I'm going to show you were taken in Jericho, although there are some at the Coombs. I think these are almost certainly all taken at Christchurch. But there you've got a photograph of Millais on the left and of Holman Hunt, both of those pictures taken by Charles Dodgson, Lewis Carroll. Next. And Hunt is the person who first attracts Carroll to the movement of the Pre-Raphaelites. He wrote again from his diary in April 1860. I'm jumping around a little bit in time, but hopefully that doesn't interrupt the flow of the talk too much. He describes having seen it at a private view as the most wonderful picture I ever saw. And I have to say it is. I don't know how well it will come out to you looking at this now, but it is an astonishing piece of work, I have to say. And I've not seen the original, but I do yearn to go and have a look now. It's closer in location, of course, to the original Jericho, the one in Palestine, but because Hunt went off there and he painted a lot of stuff in the Holy Land and Egypt. But anyway, there he also met the Coombs again, so that was a chance encounter, I suspect. But he clearly, from that diary entry, they're getting on well, they're sharing different interests, and subsequently it is Coombe who agrees to publish Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, of course, which we will get to shortly. Okay, next. But Coombe has other important roles to play, unwittingly, really, I think. He's a kind of passive player in this, in a sense. He just has the premises, he has the contacts with the artists, and Carroll is kind of just sort of brushing up against him and these people at a time when he is creatively trying to create the story of Alice himself. So this telling, I think, very telling diary entry here, 1863 again, called on Mr. Coombe with my first drawing on wood. He'd already got in mind that he would get the University Press to publish something. But just by chance, Woolner, a Pre-Raphaelite sculptor, was there, as you can see, just beginning a bust of Mr. Coombe. He condemned the arms, which he says I must draw from the life. Now that's a kind of Pre-Raphaelite mantra. They went to extraordinary lengths to try and get almost a photographic image of their artwork, of anything they were sort of looking at. That is an example of Carroll's own illustrations that he originally intended to use for his book about Alice, but it was criticism like that from Woolner that kind of persuaded him that he ought to be looking elsewhere. And subsequently, of course, he did get the very famous and very accomplished illustrator Sir John Tenniel to do the books, and that probably who knows, it probably made a big difference in their popularity initially. Next. There is that bust that he mentions that was being carved at that moment by Woolner. And then, again, I'm not sure how clear this will be to you, but the image on the right-hand side is the list of paintings which Martha bequeathed to the Ashmolean Museum, including that bust, once Thomas Coombe had died. He predeceased her. And so where I put the blue arrows there, those are the different items that I've either already referred to or will be referring to, I think, next. And the next one is, next. Yeah, so London Bridge on the night of the marriage of the Prince and Princess of Wales, again in 1863. Dodgson himself didn't go up to London for this. We know that because he was in Oxford. He was in Oxford with Alice. There were celebrations throughout the land. Oxford was no exception. There would be bonfires, illuminations, and so on. And Carroll was entrusted with his brother to take Alice out on the streets amongst all the crowds, the jostling crowds. And there's that little sort of memoir to himself that he wrote in his diary on the same day that this event was happening in London, the big event. It was delightful to see the thorough abandonment with which Alice enjoyed the whole thing. The wedding day of the Prince of Wales I mark with a white stone. That is something that's a sort of a shorthand he uses throughout the diary for very special moments, very special occasions. And talking of special occasions, that painting was one of the ones donated to the Ashmolean, and the reason why Thomas Combe might have fancied owning it in his collection, you'll see in the next image, please. Because right down in that bottom left corner, there is Combe. Whether he asked for this, whether Holman Hunt thought, well, a good way to, get him to buy this will be to, put Combe in amongst the crowd. Whether he was even there in reality or not, it's difficult to say, in fact. But there he is in the crowd down at that bottom left. And that then has that moment, that's day, that marriage of the Prince and Princess of Wales has ramifications for the book itself, for an episode within Alice's Adventures. Next. Because a little bit later in the year, in June, the newlyweds come down to Oxford. They stay at Christ Church as the guests of the little family, and Carroll noted on one day that the children left to play croquet with the royal guests. Almost certainly that is an incident which inspired him to include the bizarre croquet game in Wonderland, where Alice is playing in Wonderland against royalty, as indeed she did play against royalty in reality on that day in 1863. Next. And then finally, before we conclude this part, I think I'm right in saying, which will be the culmination of all of the things I've told you about, which then leads to the publication of the book Alice's Adventures in Wonderland at the University Press, which you're seeing another view of here. The last piece in that little jigsaw is a publisher. So Carroll has got to know the Little family very well. He's gone on boat trips. A number of the real things have occurred that Alice has asked him to write the story down. He's agreed. He's done his handwritten version. He's then been dissuaded from using his own illustrations. He has then decided he's got hold of a proper illustrator, Sir John Tenniel, and so it's all moving towards the culmination of getting it to press. But the final thing is then it's all very well doing that, but then you need someone to distribute it. And once again, it's at Thomas Coombs that this last piece comes to, where he meets Alexander Macmillan, the publisher, the one, the company which, famous publishing company who do subsequently publish Alice's Adventures. Next.
There we are. If I might ask you some questions, Mark, absolutely fascinating. I mean, I didn't know any of that, and all the connections with the OUP and so on. So you have this idea of a creative circle of artists, writers, all under the benefaction of Thomas Combe. So it was like a medieval court of artists and creative people, was it?
Was it? Yes, I suppose it was. I mean, they came. It was Combe that attracted them well, it wasn't Combe that attracted Millais originally. He had some family in Oxford, and he liked the scenery. But they need, artists need to sell their stuff, and without Combe's patronage, I think, they would have gone somewhere else, and you wouldn't have this. It's essentially it's the only art movement you can call British. I think I'm right in saying I'm no art historian, but without Combe, that's clearly. And they came back. Holman Hunt and Millais in particular came back to Oxford on many occasions.
So Combe was the midwife of the British Pre-Raphaelites in lots of ways.
He was the catalyst, and he was the glue, and he he accommodated them, he encouraged them. Bear in mind also the other individual who we don't have time to talk about really, but John Ruskin. Ruskin, an Oxford person, former Christ Church undergraduate, the preeminent art critic of the time. What he said went, and he supported the Pre-Raphaelites as well. I think if either of these two men had not, the whole movement could have been quite different, really. Well, they were clearly brilliant people. They were brilliant artists. When you look at the work they did, they would have found their niche, whatever. But it wouldn't have had this Oxford association.
Was it financial as well? Did Combe support them financially? Did the OUP support them financially?
No, well, only in the sense of buying their stuff, buying their artwork, and that the subsequent.
Yeah, I just wondered, with all their close links to Combe, why didn't the OUP publish Alice in Wonderland? Or will you tell us that in part two?
No, they did. Yeah. Sorry, yes, it was. But Looking Glass was not. But right. Wonderland was published in Oxford, yes, and Jericho.
So at that time, in the middle of the 19th century, that Jericho was in fact the sort of creative capital of Oxford. It was sort of the Hampstead of Oxford, was it?
I think that might be stretching a point. It would be nice to think so, wouldn't it? Its own. I don't think they probably went much further than the quadrangle of the university press itself, except, as you will hear towards the end, Port Meadow beckoned. Clearly, yes, the Jericho environs, one might say, but not the suburb itself, probably.
Okay, you made your own segue onwards and upwards to with more Alice, please.
Okay. So that's fine. We can move on and discuss the actual publication of the book. So, as I say, in the first half, all of these pieces were coming together. Carol's photography I've underlined. There's yet another example of his rather brilliant portrait photography. He could very easily have been a professional, I think it's true to say. This is very early days for the art or the science of photography, if you like. But had he not been had a full-time job teaching maths at Christ Church, I think he could very easily have taken another line and become quite a famous photographer. And that is the first page of the Macmillan Clarendon Press publication. 1865 is the date on it, and that's key because what happened is that Carol paid. The press wasn't set up really to do fiction. That was not what the press did. But because of the connections with Thomas Combe that I've already referenced, I think he was prepared to sort of make an exception and print little children's fairy story. There was no risk to the press or to Combe himself. Carroll had to pay for it all himself, and then Macmillan's would do the kind of distribution. That was the arrangement, and it's so far so good. But next, note that Carroll specifically wanted the official publication date to be the 4th of July in 1865. That's precisely 3 years from the day that the story was first told, when he first started to think about bringing it to Alice on a famous boat trip up to Godstow. So he himself Carroll, Charles Dodgson, put his hand in his pocket, paid a very substantial amount of money, really, for that time, for those 2,000 copies. He was given the first 50, specially bound, to give out to people who had helped, and dispatched to various people that he wanted to sort of ingratiate himself with, which again is sort of standard author behaviour, if you like. But one of those people, understandably, was John Tenniel himself, the illustrator, and you can see his example in the opposite the title page there. And unfortunately, next please. Tenniel himself objected. He found them to be the printing to be substandard. So this venture of Thomas Coombs backfired rather badly for all concerned in many respects, because Carroll had no choice, really. He couldn't. John Tenniel was famous. He was extremely famous by then. He was a professional. He called the shots, more or less. And if he said it wasn't good enough, then what could a nobody like Charles Dodgson do with that? He had to kind of take the hit, really. So he very nobly, I think, originally decided that he would simply scrap the lot and take the hit, and then print a second lot and get the press to do it better. In fact, he didn't go back to the press, not the university press. He got it printed somewhere else in London when he did do that second 2,000. But in the interim, he'd already sent out these 50 copies. He asked people to send back, what Tenniel had decided were inferior. Not everybody did, and those people who didn't were quids in later on if they kept it within the family, because those 23 or 50 rather first genuine first editions are the only ones with that 1865 publication date on, the only one, and these are the ones that were done at Jericho at the press, and of course they have become fabulously valuable. Only 23 have been traced, so there may still be others out there. And if you want to quickly have a look behind the sofa or up in your attic, look for that 1865 date. You would be about £1.5 million richer if you've got such an Alice somewhere in your possession. However, yes, next. Interestingly, however, he was prepared to take the hit, as I say, and just hope that by doing a second print run he would get away with it and could just balance the books eventually. But it's actually Millais. Carroll was up in London taking photographs of John Millais at this exact time. And it was Millais who said, well, you can't just dump all of that, paperwork. Millais might even have seen a copy. I've seen a copy. The Bodleian owns one. The Bodleian owns the one that used to belong to Martha Combe herself. And it, quite honestly, it doesn't look bad. I don't know whether it's just really bad luck. Maybe John Tenniel just happened to get a particularly bad one. But what Millais said, Dodgson was up there taking photographs of him and his family, was, keep back those 2,000 and don't dump them. And indeed he didn't. What happened in the end was all of the pages of those 2,000 printed first editions got rebound, exported to America, were printed with a different title page, and he kind of at least got back a little bit of his finance that way. And Tenniel seemed to be quite happy with that, actually. As long as it's just in Britain that he didn't want his reputation to be tarnished in any way. So it's a bizarre, isn't it? It's a bizarre beginning to the world's most famous children's story, this false start that subsequently results in so few of these really, really valuable, much sought after first editions. Next. But mathematician or no, when Carroll noted to himself in his diary in August 1865 that if he could just about square the accounts, even that he said he could hardly hope for. But actually, by the time of his death, he'd sold about 150,000 copies or more of both books, and was considerably back in pocket, let's say. So a story with a happy ending in that sense. Next. Back to Jericho, however, I'm aware that that I'm sort of clutching on straws a little bit, so we haven't talked too much about Jericho itself. But my justification for the content of this talk is that almost everybody referenced came to Jericho at some point as the guest of Thomas Combe, and therefore you've got this nice interconnection there. And Combe was also almost certainly, I think, responsible for that event in Carroll's life. I've already referred to the fact that he had a stutter or a hesitation. There were certainly certain consonants that he found rather difficult to pronounce, and therefore, even though he was ordained, he resisted. He was very reluctant to preach any sermons. And yet, there we have that first sermon that he preached in Oxford, in the church at which Thomas Combe was a church warden, the one which is more or less opposite the University Press in Walton Street. St Paul's now the wine bar Jericho. So, so he preached not for the first time, but for the first time in Oxford, as I say. And then afterwards, who's there? Holman Hunt and the Warners. It's a creative little grouping at lunchtime there, once again as the guests of Mr. Combe. And within the two black and white images on the right hand side there of the inside of St Paul's, when it was actually a church, Holman Hunt's designs there of the forget actually what the topic is, but there's a religious element to that, probably commissioned by Combe again. I don't think there's any firm information about that, but it's Combe's persuasion, almost certainly, that would have encouraged Holman Hunt or enabled him to participate in that decoration there within St Paul's. Next. And then just as a quick aside, but again, it's got Jericho associations because Thomas and Martha Combe were Jericho residents for the whole time that they lived in Oxford, pretty much. Is this bizarre little incident, which I think sort of fits into influencing the sequel, which we will come to shortly. The second half of this talk won't be as long as the first, I should point out. There's this reference in Lewis Carroll's diary for the 10th of August 1867, and I should have been a bit more coy about this and not put that it was in Moscow, because that's all he says. It could, that's dined with Mr. Penny, an Anglican chaplain, to meet Mr. and Mrs. Combe and their niece, Miss Natalie. That could so easily have just been something that he would have said if he'd gone to Jericho and had lunch or dinner with the Combes. But it wasn't in Jericho, it was in Moscow. He doesn't explain any more about this. It's so bizarre. It's the only time that Carroll ever went. He went for 2 months, and there, the Combe in Moscow. He doesn't say whether he expected them to be there, but it's a complete surprise. It's a mystery, but it's rather intriguing, very intriguing indeed. And it's something I talk about on occasions, that very interesting trip he made to Moscow and beyond. Okay, next. Because a couple of years later, what we find is, I've mentioned St Paul's Church, chapel, which was too small for the growing suburb of Jericho. So what Thomas Combe is most famous for of all, really, when it comes to his connections in Jericho, is for his funding of this church of St Barnabas, the one that replaced St Paul's, which was considered to be too small for purpose. So St Barnabas can take 1,000 people. The land was donated by two people who had made their money as coal merchants and boat builders of Jericho, and a gentleman is building a church. That is Thomas Combe. Next. So there was fundraising going on as well to get an endowment for the church, and there are 3 publications of different lists of people who have paid, who made quite considerable donations, some of them towards the subsequent upkeep of the church, paying for the clergy, paying for any expenses and running costs and so on. As I say, there are 3 different printed versions of this, but this is the one that includes himself. C.L. Dodgson. What's that? £10? Yes, £10. So that's a decent chunk of money to put towards the process. Henry Liddon is the person that he travelled to Russia with, who also made a slightly smaller donation. There are other people that Carroll is associated with. Kitchin was someone he went out rowing on the river with, and someone indeed that he gave one of these priceless, now first editions of Alice to. And it's the Kitchin family, who I think I'm right in saying were the last to put their book on the market, and which, as I say, didn't quite reach their asking price of 1.5 million, which is what the previous one to come on the market had reached. And then the Reverend T.J. Prout is another one. Prout, a lifelong friend of Lewis Carroll from Christchurch, who is probably a shoo-in for the character of the Dormouse at the Mad Tea Party. Next. So just to remind you, as we conclude, I do want to just say, this is the 150th anniversary of Through the Looking Glass, so I will just finish with a couple of references to that book. But there you are. That's the way it's running through. And Carroll had already been thinking about a sequel while he was on that trip to Russia. I can't find any particular inspiration that he took from that, but nonetheless, one feels that there ought to have been a little bit. Okay, next. But chess is the key to it. The first book is all about cards, playing cards. The second one is all about chess. And as early as the year after the publication of Alice, as you can see from these references from his diary in 1866, at the same time that he was already thinking about a floating idea of writing a sort of sequel to Alice, he was also sort of very much into chess, as indeed I think, as you'll see in the next, was Alice herself. Next. Oh no, actually that will come at the end. But that is that is certainly a game that the girls understood. They played quite a lot, and therefore there was a logic to creating that as the backdrop to the Looking Glass. There was a bit of a delay in getting it published because John Tenniel was preoccupied for various reasons, but Carroll decided that it was worth waiting. He tried several other illustrators, but ultimately decided that it was clear that there was only one man really suitable for the job, and that was the same man who had done his first book. So there are quite a number of Oxford realities that are highlighted again in the book, as there were in the first one. And we have a double chance to celebrate 150 years, because although it was available at the end of 1871, he printed it, or Macmillan's printed it with the date 1872. So we probably will extend the 150th to next year, because it's been a bit muted this year. Difficult to organise very much with any great certainty, as I'm sure you will sympathise with. So we would hope there would be more of a fanfare for this second publication of the sequel next year. Next. And there is one episode I did mention during the chat in the middle that although one can't correlate anything in Jericho itself or even on the canal to Through the Looking Glass. Possibly, just possibly, the episode of in Square 7, because Alice moves across the chessboard, as you probably know, as a white pawn, and then becomes a white queen when she gets to the end of the book. In other words, Square 8, exactly as you can do in a proper chess game. So this is again from Lewis Carroll's diary, where he and the little family were all on Port Meadow to see this huge celebration. And it was wet and boggy, and there was a bit of chaos on that real day. amongst all the soldiers and the horses. And, it was a shared experience again that Carol had with Alice and the girls, and possibly that's what he's thinking of when he references that the fictional Alice thought that in all her life she had never seen soldiers so uncertain on their feet. Next. Oh yes, that's so. Alice does make a reference to learning chess at the time, and that's in this memoir. But she also, and more specifically, makes references to the inspiration of the river, and that's my normal sort of theme for the talks that I give and the walks I give, and indeed for the book that I've published in particular. Many people have realised how important the River Thames was to the creation of the book, but I've collated all of that information and collected that information to make a more concentrated approach to just how important the people, the events, and the places along the river, the 10 miles of the river that they travelled, were to the creation of both books. Next. And there, to conclude with two little adverts. If anybody is interested in the book, I'd be very happy. You can get in touch with me at my website there, the Oxford Waterworks website, or it is available in several locations within Oxford. And then next, this will be clearly time limited. If for anybody who doesn't get to listen to this broadcast within the next couple of days, but every year in Oxford there is Alice's Day, and it is on the first Saturday of July every year. It is commemorating the boat trip of the 4th of July 1862, going up to Godstow. And on this coming Saturday, I am able to give guided walks for the first time since last August. And even then, I only gave one in August last year. And then prior to that, I think the previous guided walks I did in Oxford were in 2019. That's the COVID factor, of course, again. So really looking forward to taking a few trips around Christchurch Meadow and outlining quite a number of things that I haven't mentioned in this talk. And again, just to remind people, the diary's wealth of information of all kinds, and we are selling these off very cheap, really, for what they are. And you can find out more about those at the Lewis Carroll Society website. So thanks for listening. I hope that was of interest.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. You put a tremendous amount of work into that. I mean, very detailed. I was able to follow it all. You told good stories there. And what's the appeal of Alice after 150 years?
That's a brilliant question, I have to say, because it's that which I don't know the answer, but the fact that it does is what interests me more than the books themselves, I have to say. I'll probably get drummed out of the Lewis Carroll Society for saying that, but I think it's the way that one can find such interesting local history within the books that interests me. That's the first point. But yes, why does it appeal to people from across the world and for so long? I think one reason is because it was the first to break the mold of rather saccharine sweet kind of children's stories. There's a menace there, which children actually love, even though Victorian parents probably didn't really want their children to love it. The children's literature of the time was all that, obey your parents, say your prayers, and everything will be lovely. There's none of that in Alice. She's got to really sort of live off her wits, and I think that's probably its enduring appeal, or part of it anyway.
I mean, it sells all over the world, doesn't it now? And how many films have there been about Alice in its time?
A pass. I couldn't count them, but it is translated into an absolutely astonishing number of languages. One of them, as I know, is Assamese. I know that because I went to Assam on family history research, and I gave talks about Alice in Assam for that reason. Not for that reason, but it was rather neat that I could do the talk, relate it to Oxford, and then people had, in the audience, had the book written in Assamese that they could refer to. Yes, it is absolutely extraordinary. But I suppose Macmillan's have to take some credit. They must have done quite a lot of marketing in this respect. Another thing is a lack of copyright, John, to be honest. I think the reason why these images of tenures are so prevalent, so utilised, is because nobody copyrighted them early on. And so they've been used in biscuit tins and card games, which is another thing, the franchise element. If you go to, I don't know, Star Wars or whatever, every publication, every book and every film relies on all the merchandising that goes with it. That happened with Alice as well. I don't think Carol benefited. I don't think Tenniel did. But there were all these other products that were produced at the time. And you can see some of them when the Museum of Oxford reopens. Some of these items will be available to view. And I think that sustained the early interest as well. It wasn't just a book. It was a kind of a franchise, if you like.
Was Tenniel an easy man to work with? Because, I mean, he comes across as a bit of a pain in the bum, demanding that books are pulped, really, because he wasn't happy with them.
Pains in each other's bums, to be honest. I think Carol was very, very particular and a very pedantic individual as well. With fair play to him, he liked everything just so. It's because of his cataloguing of every single photograph he took and keeping records of every single letter he wrote that we have such a wealth of information about what he was doing and what he did, where and when. I think he must have been pretty persuasive, though. Well, I mean, Tenniel had a reputation. Carol didn't at all. You can understand Tenniel being a bit precious about about getting his own reputation sullied. But I think it's to Carol's credit, really, that ultimately he did tend to go with what Carol wanted, actually, because Carol had done his written version, and a number of the illustrations do follow more or less the sort of the sort of blueprint that Carol had presented for him. He was prepared to, he wasn't that proud.
Was Tenniel a knight by the time Carol came to work with him?
That's a good question. I don't believe so. No, I think certainly not when he was doing Wonderland. I can't remember offhand, to be honest, but I don't think so.
And did the OUP ever recover from losing Lewis Carroll?
I think they've done fine, don't you?
And Macmillan plainly did.
Yes.
Now, a difficult question, really. An older man telling stories to a young girl. There'd be a few questions asked nowadays in these PC times, wouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's inevitably something which crops up on a regular basis. That kind of viewing this relationship with our jaundiced modern eyes, I think. What I would say about that is that there was never any secrecy. It was quite clear always to the parents what was going on. You always sought permission. The sisters were always there. There was on these boat trips. There was always another adult. And in terms of the slightly risque photography that occasionally emerges, that was totally normal for all Victorian photographers. Even naked children was seen as a kind of a lovely purity about it, rather than anything salacious. So I think it's very easy to be suspicious and to read between the lines when you read someone's diary that he never expected to be published. After all, I suppose it's always a bit awkward, that I would have thought, if I think back to things I've jotted down in my youth, in particular in diaries. Would you really want that published? I don't know, but no, I can't see that there's anything really that suspicious about it at all, personally.
So now on to this Saturday, 3rd of July. What delights can people expect if they come along to one of your walks and talks on Christchurch Meadow? Where does it start?
Well, you need to pre-book. So I'm not going to say where it starts. You do need to pre-book because I have to keep it to only 14 people. Real Carol scholars will wonder why. No, sorry, they'll realise perhaps why I've chosen the number 14 and why I'm doing 3 walks of 14 people. I'll leave that one hanging, but it's just a beautiful place to walk around anyway, and it does conveniently enable reference to some of the things I've mentioned, some that I've not, but also amazingly those three other giants of Oxford fantasy fiction, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, and Philip Pullman. They can all be referenced in that beautiful circuit of Christchurch.
And will they be coming along to your walk, or Philip Pullman be one of the 14?
He's never come on a walk with me, but as you know, John, he has been out on the river. I have tried to inspire some of his scene setting, let's say, by a trip on the river once.
Thank you very much for a wonderful, wonderful talk. Philip Pullman, as you happen to mention his name, is one of the people who I'm hoping to tempt to come to St. Barnabas to talk about Jericho as it's part of his literature. But the very, very first live by Jericho for probably 18 months will occur on the 22nd of July in the very same St. Barnabas, which will be the great Peter Taylor, the man who's reported in Northern Ireland for 50 years and who's trusted by all sides. 6 o'clock on the 22nd of July in St. Barnabas. It'll cost a fiver, but the fiver will go towards the Church Organ Fund. Please come to that. It's after the famine, we can have a feast. So hopefully we'll have him and we'll have Pullman and others. And then back on the virtual circuit on the 22nd of July at 6 o'clock, there'll be a book launch. The BBC 100, Will It Make It? The BBC is 100 years old next November. We'll have a discussion based on, believe it or believe it not, a book of mine about discussing the effects of the Bashir affair and others, not just by me, but some very important people. That'll be chaired by Sir Anthony Selden, the well-known contemporary historian. So try and watch that. 6 o'clock on Wednesday, 21st of July. Peter Taylor is on the 20th of July. I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong date for that. And there will be more to follow, but I think we'll probably be taking the summer off and coming back in September after that. As I always say, these things cost money. We've tried to make it technically very sophisticated and so on. So if you feel generous, do go to the MailChimp address and you'll find details of crowdfunding. All money goes straight back into it. And finally, there is going to be another event in July, on July the 24th, after the Jericho book fair last week. There'll be a Jericho art fair in Mount Place. That'll be from 12 till 4. If you want to come along and see art, if you have some art you want to display or you want to sell, do contact me. But meanwhile, thank you very much and have a good week off. And thank you, Mark, very much indeed. Goodbye.
All right, bye.
Yoo-hoo!